Hello, it's Moonkamuk here again today with a new video. Today is essentially a new concept on how to make a mud to clay converter. If you do not know, you can essentially take a water bottle and put in a dispenser, or you can do it yourself and right click on dirt, you can turn that into mud, and then if you place dripstone underneath the mud, it'll turn into clay, and then from there you can mine it up and smelt it and turn it into bricks. So simple farms or converters on YouTube essentially have a massive platform of dripstone with just some pistons to automate moving the blocks so the player doesn't have to move around, and then the player here just stays in one spot and places blocks and let it push through. Now, one thing to note, I'll change this back to normal speed, is whenever there's clay already in the farm with dripstone underneath, that dripstone is no longer doing work for you. So that often means you have to have a lot of dripstone in order to meet the supply rate of what the player can place for blocks, which means you have to use a lot of dripstone, the majority of which is not actually doing the work. So can we actually improve that? Yes, we can. El Mango here had a instrument-based block sorter, which is this simple thing here. There's different variants depending on what pros and cons of what you need, but the point of it is when there's air block under it, it makes this noise. When there's mud and when there's clay, as you notice, the clay sound is very different because it is a different instrument. It's the flute, while air and mud both share the harp. So essentially this here observer can detect an instrument change. So what that means is essentially you can place mud here and let it go through the system, and it'll push it out wherever they see clay. And once it's that, mud will stick, and then once it converts into clay, do that, it'll automatically push itself out. Now there's a flaw with this kind of design, or even with this one back here, if you're using pistons to extend it even farther, is if you place it too fast or it backs up. If you notice, it jams and the farm will no longer work. So because of that, then you have to go back to each corner and manually open a block. And then also with the converter itself, if it's filled up and you mine it kind of empty and you still have like mud back here, for example, and then now you try to fill it up, if you notice, the mud just got spit out into the clay section, which is a no-go for what is supposed to be a clay to mud converter. So is that there is a flaw. Now, is there any other way to make it so this here doesn't happen? Yes, there is, because there is another difference between clay and mud, which is clay here is a full block, while mud is actually not a full block and is slightly lower, as you can see by that drop down. And to be precise, it is mud is 0.125 lower than a flow block, which means we can detect that because if we place a armor stand here, for example, and we do F3 and B, as you can see it's lower, but essentially when we move it over, as you can see it drops down. Essentially this is how mud was originally behaving at when it was first added, when I was first trying to design this, so there was a whole bunch of shenanigans trying to get it to work. However, later they fixed the bug with it, so now when I place this here and speed up the game, once I place the dripstone underneath for it to actually convert, and now I speed up the game. If you notice, the RR stam jumped up, so we can actually use that change in height, and as long as it triggers a pressure plate, we can essentially detect the difference of whenever there's a clay versus whenever there's a mud. I just have to be careful of the piston pushing out. So in order to do that, I need to find some entity that when it moves, it triggers a pressure plate. Now you might be thinking, oh, I could use the armor stand itself, because as you can see that this one here moved up an entire block. However, you can't really go down because if you do this here, place the mud first. Wow, that was actually placed. There you go. Now speed up the game. If you notice, obviously, first of all, it breaks itself, and second of all, if you notice, this is how I got the ghost block generator, because I knew it was going to break, but just want to see what happens. Anyways, so essentially I need to find something where the difference would essentially cause a trigger output. So there's a bunch of mobs that can do it. Things to note is armor stands, bats, and wardens technically could have worked when they go inside the minecart. However, they can't actually sit in a minecart, which is surprising for the bats. So yeah, so mobs that does work is guardians here. As you can see, when it's on mud, no output, and there is on clay. Same thing with wolves, even parrots, and then pigs. And then if you go up to the 2-block one, you have the llamas. I'm pretty sure. Yep, llamas. And then you also have this snowman. The only thing is, this here is biome dependent. This one's hard to get. This one's actually a good container because it's fairly cheap and simple. This one could be hard to get if you don't have a jungle. Same thing with this one. It's kind of biome, hard to get. And this one here, while you're hostile. So choosing that, we'll use the pig. So you might be thinking, oh, we can just slap a fast clock onto this here, and then there you go. That's all you need for the detection base. Only problem with this is if you get some mud here, if you notice, mud just slipped through there because the clock is too fast. So this here, you have to have a slower clock, and that's where these two designs here come in. Let's change that back to normal. So first of all, there's kind of two slices in order to make it tileable, but essentially this here is just a main clock with the off switch here, and then this single block's just to make it so it's tileable with this version of the next slice. As you can see, one thing I just forgot to note is how to essentially get the pig in the cart in that location. Essentially, you can build the whole thing and leave it right to the end, and then you essentially want to place 2 rails and have essentially the rail here slope down. You can place your pig, place your cart, move it down, and there you go. That's all, and then you can move the rails, and that's how you put the pig into position. Once I place a mud, it drops down, pulls the piston back with the block so it stops the clock, and then essentially it allows other blocks to go through, and then wherever it converts, it goes back up, and then there you go. Yeah, it's 300, but as you can see, it's going through, and there you go. And then once it hits the end, it gets pushed down. So this way, even if it jams, it will still store itself out, because like for example, I can show that here. If I place an obsidian block here, place the mud in, as you can see, the clock still gets go, and as soon as you mine something out in the output, it'll start working again. So there's that, and then those are the 2 columns to make sure the wires don't cross each other. So you can essentially tile this into a massive converter farm right here. I'll just place a block here for me to stand on, and essentially you can place, and you can essentially chain them all up, and then essentially you have 10 blocks in a row, and you just need to do a slight jag or piston and move it up to line up for the next one, and just repeat back and forth. Now, just to automate the thing here, I'll have this command block place the blocks for me. So as you can see, the thing here comes through and works its way from the front to the back. And the other bonus with it being jam proof is if this ever fails, you don't have to clear out the whole system. Additionally, you can have essentially dripstone follow the whole way, all the way. So even if it's, let's say it converts over on here, once it's converted, the first one where there's first one to get triggered, push out, the clay would get ejected with that. So if you see sometimes, yeah, these ones here moving more than one at once, that's essentially clearing out this section here. And I'll do a tick warp here, or not tick warp, tick sprint, go 3 days. Let me speed this up. Essentially, once it goes through a section, these ones here will start to die down. I just realized I have this on 300. This farm behaves differently depending on the random tick speed you have it set. 3 is normal default behavior. So this here, as you can see, there was a lot of converting, but on normal behavior or free ticks, it actually takes a lot longer for it to convert. So that's the reason why you're going to need multiple sections. Now eventually you're going to hit a point where by the time it takes it down, it'll be pretty well guaranteed to be clay, and then at that point it'll just be shooting down at full speed, and then once that section's filled, it'll go up to the next and fill that one up at full speed, and so forth and so forth. So that there is a thing, and as you can see, it's slowly working its way. Yeah, so now it's working its way here. Now the good thing is, essentially it prioritizes the one closest, so if any of these request it, these ones technically won't get. However, if you notice right here, since it's jam proof, there's essentially 3 blocks in storage. So if this one here is requesting stuff, and then the next section also requests stuff, it can just use one of the free jam ones without slowing down the rates of each section. So that means essentially the sections farther down has like more and more blocks jammed, so even if you turn off the farm will keep running for a little bit. Now there is a on-off switch, since that is a lot of clocks running over time. Oh wait, not that, this one here. And essentially that's what the redstone torches are here for at the end, to essentially turn off each section. And then that there also is used to time the 4 game tick clocks to be on the right offset, so essentially it will agree with you placing the blocks, so it will allow it to go through constantly and go through the whole system. There will be a world download in the description, because it kind of shows the timing and that kind of stuff. And you can essentially, if this is getting too long, you can also reroute it and make it go back and do like another strip going that way.